Into the frozen disorder of Valley Forge rode a man who looked like trouble. And I love a man that looks like trouble. I can only imagine. I'm glad I wasn't there, but I can only imagine. This was Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, and he arrived in February of 1778, and he was wearing borrowed finery, he was carrying inflated letters of recommendation, and he was speaking almost no English at all. He was very stout, he was very imperious, and he was unmistakably European in his bearing. He was Prussian by training and courtly by habit, and he was allergic to sloppiness. He had his pinkies up, y'all. Honestly, when he rode into that camp, the American army he encountered must have looked like madness. He was probably like, oh my God, turn around, we're going home, this is a lost cause. But he did stay. Now, what he saw while he was there were officers arguing with enlisted men, which is a no-no. He saw units that drilled differently depending on which colony they came from. He noticed that the muskets were being handled incorrectly. Bayonets were basically just treated like decorative afterthoughts. Commands varied from regiment to regiment, and even though there was bravery everywhere, there was coherence literally nowhere. To Steuben, this was not an army at all. This was just raw material, just a big old hunk of clay, and he had his work cut out for him for sure. Now, the culture shock, it did run both ways. American officers were kind of wary of the idea of a foreigner criticizing men who had already been on the battlefield and had bled for this cause. Steuben, for his part, could not comprehend how an army survived without any form of standardized procedure. This blew his mind. His frustration was not unknown. They saw it often. It boiled over frequently, and it was usually in very colorful, very creative, multilingual profanity that had to be translated, cleaned up, and then politely reissued. And oddly enough, this actually made him very popular. Now, Steuben did not begin by lecturing the entire army, though I'm sure he wanted to. He actually started very small. He selected a very small model company of 100 men, and he started drilling them relentlessly. Now, this was not just mindless marching back and forth, but this was very purposeful movement. He taught them how to load efficiently, how to use their muskets properly, how to move as a unit without collapsing into confusion and looking left and right and going, what's this guy doing? I guess I'll do that too. Most revolutionary of all was his insistence on the bayonet. American soldiers really feared bayonet charges because they had never been trained how to use them properly. And Steuben changed that entirely. He taught them that the bayonet was not just a blade, it was a psychological weapon, and competence, once learned, spread quickly. He simplified these commands, put them into layman's terms, dumbed everything down for everybody. I mean, he just was like, listen, we're going to just make it simple. We're going to reduce complexity. He created all these drills that could be repeated and memorized and taught onward so that people were constantly practicing and paying it forward. And the men he trained became instructors themselves. They were spreading uniformity throughout the entire camp like warmth returning to frozen limbs. And let me tell you too, if you're sitting there and you've got the dysentery and you're just having a real bad day, I promise you sitting there and thinking about it on loop all day is the worst thing that you could possibly do. Getting these men up and saying, hey, walk that way, walk back this way, check out this cool bayonet trick. That was probably one of the most impactful things that someone could do on a mental level for these young men. And as a result, this was the first time that the Continental Army actually began to move as one unified body. Discipline under Steuben did not mean cruelty, it meant full-on clarity. Soldiers were treated with dignity, they were punished fairly if they needed it, and they were trained. He understood something very thoroughly that most European officers did not. These men were not conscripts. They were citizens of a new nation under God. George Washington recognized Steuben's value almost immediately. Where others saw this blunt, abrasive foreigner, Washington saw exactly what the army needed. He gave Steuben complete and total authority. He shielded him from any political interference, and he allowed him to fail, to adjust, and then try again. So, in a nutshell, George Washington was not micromanaging this man, and thank God for it. Because when resistance resurfaced, and it did, Washington stood very firm. This was not about pride. It was about complete and total survival. Washington understood that courage without any structure was a complete and total dead end. And he also understood that Steuben's methods were transforming the army faster than any speech or any decree ever could. And by springtime, the difference was unmistakable. Units were maneuvering very smoothly. Orders were executed very cleanly. Confidence replaced any forms of hesitation. When the army marched out of Valley Forge, it was a completely different force than the one that had limped in just months prior to this. It was leaner, it was sharper, it was refined to a perfect point. These men were unified, and when the Continental Army met the British again at Monmouth, I never know how to say anything. Whenever they met the British again, they were standing toe to toe in open battle, and all of this work that they had put in immediately showed. These men did not break, they didn't scatter, they stood there and they fought like professionals. And Baron von Steuben did not bring victory in his saddlebags, he brought complete and total transformation.